The child thought for a while and then started drawing 9 lines on the notebook and then started drawing 7 other lines on the notebook. And while drawing those lines, unfortunately, because it was a ruled notebook, she drew one of those lines on an existing line in the notebook. And then she started counting, and after a lot of effort, came out with the answer 3. While learning basic math or basic reading skills may sound very simple, but for a young child, it is very difficult.
Right.
And that is why foundational learning is not easy to come by for most children. Teaching is an astoundingly complex job. And studies show that on a typical day, the teacher ends up taking almost 2,000 to 3,000 micro decisions. That's like trying to be an air traffic controller. So when children learn to read, then they can read to learn. So, for example, if I know how to read in, let's say, my language class, I know also how to read word problems in math. I also know how to understand social science or science. But if I haven't mastered these basic skills by the time, let's say, I'm 8 or 10, I'll find it very difficult to process what is coming at me in the higher grades.
Welcome to the Learning Circle, the ultimate video podcast for educators and parents who want to unleash the full potential of children. Join us as we explore the fascinating world of learning with the help of thought leaders who will share their knowledge and stories with us. This is your host Kavleen Kaur, and I'm excited to take you on this journey. Get ready to be inspired, informed, and entertained. Welcome to the Learning Circle. Today's conversation is about a topic which affects millions of Indian children but rarely gets discussed. How do we conduct effective foundational learning for all our young children? My guest today is Anustup Nayak, Classroom Instruction Practices, Early Childhood Education at Central Square Foundation. Anustup leads CSF's work with 11 state governments, implementing structured pedagogy, a teaching approach that's showing remarkable results across thousands of classrooms. Anustup, welcome to the Learning Circle.
Thank you, Kavleen, for having me. I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Let's start with a real story. Help us understand, what does a child struggling with early learning look like?
It must have been 4 years ago, and I was visiting one of the schools in one of the states, and my colleague Raghav and I were wanting to know what was going on with the children. Raghav asked the child, "What is 9 minus 7?" So, what do
Okay.
you think is 9 minus 7? Yes, right? And how much time did that take you to answer that?
A couple of seconds. In
Maybe
fact, it
even
should have
less.
been lesser.
Yes, maybe even lesser. So what happened with the child was very interesting, and it has been imprinted in my mind. The child thought for a while and then started drawing 9 lines,
Yeah.
like on the notebook, and then started drawing 7 other lines on the notebook.
Hmm.
And while drawing those lines, unfortunately, because it was a ruled notebook, she drew one of those lines on an existing line in the notebook. And then she started counting, and after a lot of effort, came out with the answer 3.
Hmm.
And, imagine you're trying to read anything that's in front of you. Do you have any text in front of you?
Okay. Can you share?
Yes. So if I was a child and I was struggling with foundational learning, what would happen to me is that I would start by trying to decode these letters, right?
Mhm.
So let's say can, the word can, right? It's made up of 3 alphabets, CAN. And imagine I'm not very strong in recognizing all these alphabets, so I'll make a lot of effort to first say, oh, there is C, there is A, there is N, and then I'll try to stitch them together and I say can,
Hmm.
right? Then I would go to U, Y, O, U, U, and then I try to read that,
Hmm.
and then I would go to give, right? But I'm making so much effort to read each alphabet and letter that by the time I reach the word give, which is barely the third word in that sentence, I might already have forgotten what the first word was. What happens when we learn something new is that we have whatever we are learning gets etched into what is called our long term memory. It's
Right.
kind of like the storehouse of all the knowledge we have. That long term memory is quite big and vast, and then we kind of pull out things from the long term memory. But in order to reach that long term memory, what tends to happen is that we have this really narrow and small scratch pad called our working memory. It's like, imagine like a funnel which
Mm-hmm.
has a very narrow pipe, and then everything should move through that pipe.
Right.
So when you've not mastered basic skills, that narrow pipe called the learning memory starts filling up,
Hmm.
and it makes it very, very hard for you to process things. But when
Right.
you master these skills, then what happens, which is what you were doing, is that when I asked 9 minus 7, you already have an understanding of numbers, you already have an understanding of words, and can quickly retrieve it. So you're not processing things with this lot of effort.
Hmm.
And why I went through this long winded explanation is to make us sensitive to the fact that while learning basic math or basic reading skills may sound very simple, but for a young child, it is very difficult.
Right.
And that is why foundational learning is not easy to come by for most children. But the benefit of having foundational learning skills are also very high. So when children learn to read, then they can read to learn. So, for example, if I know how to read in, let's say, my language class, I know also how to read word problems in math. I also know how to understand social science or science. But if I haven't mastered these basic skills by the time, let's say, I'm 8 or 10, I'll find it very difficult to process what is coming at me in the higher grades. So, what happens is that children who fall behind early also unfortunately then stay behind. So,
Hmm.
that's why foundational learning is so important, that we need to get every child in our country and across the world to master these basic skills by
Hmm.
the time they're 8 or 10, so that then they can free themselves up uh, to acquire other higher order skills.
Right. Thank you for sharing that detailed explanation. And all the effort which is out there goes on in developing the students' skills. But CSF, on the other hand, focuses on developing the skills of the teachers to help students learn these skills. So, what is this different approach? What is the benefit as compared to other approaches that we may have out there?
No, it's a great question. And I think we need to again go back to the classroom. And if I may take you back again to the classroom, which you and I would have experienced in our time, a
Mhm.
whole lot of things have changed, perhaps for those who are more fortunate. But for a vast majority of schools and classrooms, not a whole lot has changed in the classroom.
Hmm.
And what has not changed is the method of teaching. While perhaps some of the different tools are there which are more available, maybe infrastructure has improved, but the
Mhm.
time spent between the teacher and the child is not of very high quality. And
Okay.
oftentimes we end up blaming the teachers for that. There is this narrative of what I call the good teacher versus bad teacher narrative. We
Hmm.
often either make teachers the villains and talk about why many teachers are under motivated or don't want to do the job. Or on the other hand, we talk about teachers as these heroes who are, striving every day to make their classroom a really meaningful place and meaningful experience for their children. Our understanding is that we need to move from this good teacher, bad teacher narrative
Hmm.
to how to focus on teaching as a verb as opposed to teacher as a noun. So, how do you make good teaching possible?
Mhm.
And the key is not to make it possible in one school or 100 schools or 1,000 schools, but how to make it possible at scale. And
Right.
that's the problem that CSF is solving along with its partners with the government of India. Because
Mhm.
the government is a key enabler in this process. The largest number of schools in India are run by the government. Largest number of children go to government schools, and therefore a very large number of teachers are also teaching in government schools. So, how do we make teachers in government schools more effective? And if you go and actually look at the life of a teacher, it's very difficult. Apart from the fact that teachers are overburdened with a lot of non teaching responsibilities, there is a lot of literature talking about how teachers are unable to spend time on their teaching duties and instead working on administrative duties. Even if you leave that problem aside and just look at what happens when a teacher is actually going to teach children, teaching is an astoundingly complex job. So think of this, that if you are getting into a classroom full of children, really young children, some of whom are very excited to learn, some of whom are not that excited to learn, some of whom are doing well in their studies, some of whom are struggling. You're confronted with this huge diversity. And
Mm.
studies show that on a typical day, the teacher ends up taking almost 2,000 to 3,000 micro decisions.
Mm-hmm.
That's like trying to be an air traffic controller, right? It's a very, very difficult job. So imagine a teacher is constantly deciding not just which topic to teach, but what questions to ask children, which children to focus on, when to talk, when to stop, when to listen, when to ask questions, when to manage the classroom. All of these things add up. So, this layer of complexity is oftentimes not totally understood by all of us who talk about teaching as a profession or want to even improve teaching. The second issue is that when it comes to preparedness of teachers, there
Mm-hmm.
is a lot of improvement needed.
Mm.
If the work of a teacher is as complex or more complex, I would argue, than an engineer or a doctor or a lawyer, why should teachers not be trained in the
Right.
same way as other professionals would, right? And if you try to be a teacher in our country and try to get trained, the first step is a pre-service education system. Most teachers go for a B.Ed or a B.L.Ed or any of the other teacher training certifications available. But many of them, not all, have curricula which have not been revised for decades.
Mm.
So we are training teachers with content which is quite outdated. But the biggest challenge is not just the content of training, because very often, sometimes with the use of internet and resources available, better content has been provided to the teachers, which is more relevant in some cases. But the other big challenge is the method of training the teachers.
Mm.
So when we go to a classroom and see that a teacher is largely doing a one-way conversation with the children or communicating a lot of information to the children, we should go back to see what happens in a teacher training program,
Mm.
and it's not very different. So teacher training program also ends up stuffing a lot of information to teachers. There's very little time an opportunity for teachers to practice what they have learned
Mm-hmm.
and leave alone a bite in the classroom. And the third step is that when teachers go back to the classroom, they miss two very, very critical ingredients which other professionals have.
Mm-hmm.
One is mentoring and guidance by expert professionals. So if you try to be a doctor, a young doctor is trained by expert physician in the medical rounds that they do. They're given feedback, and that kind of mentoring is often missing in schools. The mentors in schools are often overburdened themselves. They're also doing things which are not academic in nature, and they're very few, so they can't visit as many schools they would like to. The second important element missing with a lot of teachers is tools. Every
Mm.
professional to succeed in their profession needs tools, right? If you have a doctor, they have a surgeon's tools, or if you're a lawyer, you have access to the latest information on judicial proceedings. But if you look at the teacher also has a textbook and the child also has a textbook. How do we equip teachers with the right kind of? So therefore, if we boil it all down, how are we trying to then make it all come together in the government system? And I'll break it into CSF approach, which has really four pillars. And the first pillar is about goal setting and communication. Do
Mm-hmm.
all the teachers know what every child has to learn at the end of every grade? What are the key learning outcomes in math or language that they have to get children to accomplish? If that goal is not very clear, then the process to reach that goal can often not be clear. The
Right.
second piece is do teachers have the pedagogical tools and techniques to teach that well? So we need to provide the right set of tools, which is often referred to as structured pedagogy, to make sure that teachers have the necessary ingredients to succeed in the classroom. And the
Uh-huh.
third one is continuous capacity building. The
Okay.
teachers need support throughout their teaching career, but that support needs to come while they're teaching in the classroom and not just in workshops and outside of the school. And
Mhm.
finally, for teaching to improve, you need assessment and data about how children are performing, and you need to be able to get that information. Learning outcomes are harder to teach, how many children are falling behind, which kind of children need remediation. So that kind of assessment and data is also very essential. So what CSF is essentially trying to do is to work with the government systems. We do not have our own programs. What we try to do is that every state government, we work with 11 state governments, they have their own academic programs, and we try to work with them as a catalytic partner to ensure that these four aspects of goal setting and communication, structured pedagogy, capacity building, assessments, and data are strengthened across the system so that the government system as a whole
Mhm.
can deliver better. Of course, there are many programs that have been tried in smaller areas, let's say 100 schools or a block or a district, and those are great pilots. But eventually, what a large country like India needs is something that works at scale.
Right,
And that's what also the government needs.
right, right, right. Right. So we covered a lot of ground in this last conversation. Now, you mentioned about the four pillars of the CSF approach. Is it all based on data when we talk about goal setting? So it is again written down, followed throughout the year, and then measured at the end of the year. So everything is data driven. Am I right there?
Yes, everything is data driven, but we one of the things we need to understand is that data alone is not sufficient. It's necessary.
Mm-hmm.
There is a lot of data being collected now at all levels thanks to technology. But the key is how to get that data to make instructional decisions. So there's lots of assessments, right? There are daily assessments and weekly assessments and monthly assessments and annual assessments. But how do we make sure that that data is available to the teacher in a format so they can then identify what differently they can do? I think the journey is towards that, where the data can actually aid in decision making by the teacher, and the data itself doesn't become a burden, but becomes a tool to improving classroom practice.
Right. That is very important. Until and unless that is translated to something meaningful and actionable, it is all useless. And since we are talking about data, I would like you to share that NEP 2020 had a goal of universal literacy by the year 2025. So, where are we with respect to that goal?
That's a great question. And as you know, the NEP 2020 is a landmark policy document, not just in India, but across the world, because of many reasons. But the one reason I think it's very special is that it places foundational literacy and numeracy at the very center of our educational enterprise. In fact, it goes on to say that if we do not achieve foundational literacy and numeracy, the rest of the document is not going to be very useful. And that's a very powerful statement. And what this has led to is a series of reforms in India, more notably the Nipun Bharat mission, which is focused on foundational literacy and numeracy. The Nipun Bharat mission was announced to make sure that India achieves FLN within a time bound manner. There is a lot of focus on various things, including political salience, that the government at all levels, starting with the prime minister to the chief ministers to the local governments, have taken foundational literacy and numeracy very seriously. There's a dedicated budget earmarked. So, for example, there is a budget of 500 rupees per child per year for innovative teaching learning materials, 150 rupees per teacher to provide teacher guides, up to 5,000 rupees a teacher for professional development. And those are very strong budget allocations because it's very easy to talk about new policies, but if you don't have the right support, then it's very hard to make things happen.
Right.
Now, the where are we? I think your question was, what's the real scorecard? I think the scorecard is the glass is little more than half full. That's what I would say. And I'll tell you which part is more than half full and which part is more than half empty. One of the interesting things that has happened over the last couple of years is that India has actually seen a tremendous uptick in the proficiency of children in early literacy and numeracy. And I'd like to call that as India's Sputnik moment. And I'll come back to the Sputnik moment in a minute. But if you
Okay.
look at the scores from the ASAR survey, which is conducted by Pratham, which is a leading NGO, the Parak Rashtriya Sarvekshan, which is conducted by the government of India, which are national assessments, they show that even after the loss we suffered from COVID, there was a huge learning loss after COVID, if you know. We have not only recovered that loss, but also made up for it. So, for example, in Nasser, the share of grade 3 students able to read a grade 2 level text was just 16.3% in 2022. It rose to about 23.4% in 2024. The share of grade 3 students who can perform basic subtraction climbed from 25.9 in 2022 to about 33.7% in 2024. Similarly, if you look at the Parak assessment, the data showed 57% of grade 3 students were proficient or above in language, and up from 39% in 2021. And similar gains in mathematics, that we jumped from 42 to 65%. These data points are important because oftentimes there is anecdotal evidence that things are improving, and in a large country like ours, it's very easy to debate from multiple viewpoints. And I'll come to some of those anecdotes later because some of those are important. But these large scale assessments done by both governmental and non governmental organizations show that we have made progress. But is that progress enough? The reality is not enough, right? If you look at the data, it's still showing that between 70 to 75% of children are still
Not there.
right? And there are many structural challenges that are there in our education system. You might have heard about the multi-grade and multi-level learning in many schools, that one teacher is teaching a class which consists of multiple grades in grade 1 and grade 2 and grade 3 sitting together. And not only are there multiple grades, there is also multiple learning levels within grades. So there is a grade 3 child who is at grade 3 level, but there's a grade 3 child who's also at grade 1 level. And that makes teachers' life very difficult. If this was not enough, we also have a language of instruction problem, that many children are coming from homes where the language of instruction at home is not the same as it is in school. Whether they speak a different dialect or they're part of a migrant community, they don't speak the same language. So imagine you or me sitting in a class where somebody's talking in language we don't understand. And that's the kind of challenge a lot of children face. Apart from that, there is also this whole bureaucratic burden on teachers. And that is cause for a lot of concern, that teachers' time on task, which is the relevant task, which is teaching and learning with the children, is often cramped. And so we have to, as a country, really focus and fix the systemic gaps. And as you said, foundational learning is a time bound goal that has been set up by the government. But if we could not achieve foundational learning in over 2 decades, it's highly unlikely that just a 3 to 5 year spurt of effort can fix the systemic problem. So we need to continue the push. So one of the things we've been all talking about is Nipun 2.0, that this Nipun Bharat mission, which is showing green shoots of success, can it go for a second avatar, which is even more focused? And we have to add a couple of more things to it, which is early childhood education. Many children are coming into grade 1 not school ready, and they lack the basic socio-emotional, cognitive, physical development, pre-literacy, pre-numeracy skills. So while children from more privileged homes are going to private preschools, many children are going to Anganwadis, which do a really good job in daycare and healthcare and support, but are so overburdened that they're not able to offer school readiness. So we
Hmm.
need very focused attention to 5 to 6 year olds. And that's very important. The Balvatika age group is very important. Similarly, children will exit grade 3 even with our best efforts without mastering grade 3 level competencies. Even if we achieve 70 to 80% competency, which is very aspirational for Nipun, we'll still have 20-30% children who might be left behind. And we
Yeah.
need to do something in grade 4 and 5 so that they can complete primary school without much difficulty. So, in short, the Nipun Bharat mission has really shown a lot of promise.
Hmm.
The initial results are very promising, both in terms of quantitative data coming from these assessments, but also on the ground, we are seeing how teachers are really more engaged, how children are learning better, how the system is more engaged. But we have miles and miles to go, and we cannot stop this momentum, this Sputnik moment. And I refer to this moment in time, which is very similar to 1957 when Soviet Russia launched the Sputnik spacecraft, and suddenly
Hmm.
the US was taken by surprise. And they asked, how come Soviet Union achieved so much? And the key was in their schooling system,
Hmm.
that they were able to deliver almost 12 years equivalent of schooling in about 10 years, and then that got the US to focus on STEM education. I think India
Yes.
is poised at such a moment in our history. It is for us, of course, collectively to make or break this moment, and I hope we make the most of this moment.
Yes, and I hope that we go forward with much greater urgency than before. And also, like you said, that we have quantitative information also available with us. We know what works on the ground, we know what are the challenges. So I think going forward could be at a much greater pace and with more depth also in addressing the problems. And this structured approach that CSF is working on is one of the solution which would take us there on our aspirational goal. So you have talked about the four pillars. So for a teacher, help us understand what this structured approach looks like in a classroom.
I think that's a great question, and if you're open to it, we'll engage in a mini learning session. But let me start with the
Yes.
structured pedagogy approach. A
Yes.
word like structured pedagogy sounds very technical, forbidding, but let me break it up in very simple terms and think about the classrooms we were exposed to.
Hmm.
So I will call it the 3 Ts. If you look at how we learned in school, which is not, like I said, very different, there are 3 Ts in that classroom. One is a teacher
Mm-hmm.
telling from a textbook, which means that literally passing on all the content that is there in that textbook to the child. So
Mm-hmm.
that was the first T is the telling T, the second T is the textbook. And the third T is that the child is asked to memorize all of that content so that you can test the child.
Mm-hmm.
Now, potentially, none of this is fundamentally wrong in its way, but we have to ask three other questions which are also related to 3 Ts, and I'll make it simple for you. That is the technique of teaching right?
Okay.
And technique means how will a teacher get the children to understand a concept,
Mm-hmm.
right? So that's the first T, the technique. The second T in structured pedagogy is the right tools, right? Does the teacher have the right tools to execute her lesson really effectively? And the third is right training. So structured pedagogy actually is a combination of these three things. Am I teaching the child using the right techniques? So for example, if I'm teaching the child, let's say, math, and am I getting the child to understand concrete objects, real life objects, and then teaching them abstract concepts? That's called the CPA approach, concrete, pictorial, and abstract
Mm-hmm.
approach. Or if I'm trying to teach children reading or literacy, can I take a balanced literacy approach where there is the right balance between different literacy skills? So, for example, lower order skills like letter recognition, word recognition, decoding, to higher order skills like vocabulary, comprehension, meaning making, background knowledge, and so on and so forth. And can children be taught using those techniques? And now, those techniques, which are based on research and evidence, are made available to the teacher. So if
Okay.
I have access to those right techniques, it's more likely that I can succeed in my classroom.
Hmm.
But right techniques are important, but two other things are important. Do I have the right tools? So when a teacher goes into the classroom, do I have clarity on what are the learning outcomes to be taught? What are the kinds of misconceptions that children are likely to have? What are the kind of prerequisite concepts children need to learn before they learn something? And what are the step by step instructions and procedures and activities to do with the children so that I can actually provide them the right instruction? And all of that is called lesson planning in general. One of the big challenges is that teachers don't have access to very high quality, well researched curricular materials. They often have to struggle to create their own resources, either using the internet or their own knowledge, and those tools are not made available. Or children's learning resources. So, are there good textbooks? Are there storybooks, workbooks, good manipulatives to learn mathematics? So, those tools are very important. And the third, we spoke about the training to teachers in at length some time back. That do teachers actually get to apply these tools and techniques during their training so that they can become proficient? So, in a way, structured pedagogy is this, that how do you get children to learn better by having a more researched way of teaching something which is likely to succeed more, but also is easy to execute? Both are important, right? So there are two words in structured pedagogy. There is structured and there is pedagogy, right? The pedagogy comes from the right techniques and the training, and the structure comes a little bit from the tools. So once you make that come together in the classroom, teachers succeed in the classroom. And if you look at the evidence that is emerging from across the world, both in India and abroad, have really high quality, peer reviewed research studies which have shown that structured pedagogy approaches have improved learning significantly. There was a program called Tusome, which was conducted. Tusome is a word in Kenya which means let's read. It was conducted in the mid 2000s and showed remarkable progress in Kenya. What they did was they provided teachers with structured lesson plans, with children with textbooks and worksheets and assessment, and they provided one-on-one coaching and mentoring to the children, and they saw results rise. Similarly, across the world, these programs have been tried where these combinations of the right pedagogical approach, tools, and training have come together. We have several results from India. Room to Read and Language and Learning Foundation have done several programs. CSF's supported many of these programs, and third party results are showing really good impact on teaching and learning. So the structured pedagogy approach really works.
Right.
And it's something that is also adopted very well in the Nipun Bharat mission. Most of the states have taken this approach. So there's a lot of promise in this.
Right. So there are these three things: technique, tools, and training. But have you ever encountered resistance from the teachers also in picking up this new approach? They may say that their creativity is being reduced by having to follow this particular approach, or there is another layer of burden being added to them. What has been the teachers' acceptance of this approach?
I think it's a great question, and often there is a lot of people, not only teachers, but sometimes education experts also express concerns that structured pedagogy limits the autonomy and creativity of teachers. It places a kind of straight jacket in which teachers have to work, so on and so forth. While some of that criticism may well be true, but I think it's very important to look at what actually is structured pedagogy trying to do and what is the actual experience of teachers using it. And I've been working in the field for the last almost 2 to 3 decades and have used one form of structured pedagogy programs or the other. The first thing that we see is that where is the effort of the teacher going on a daily basis? Like we said, teachers are overworked and overwhelmed. One of the things we have done a lot of studies is what is the kind of effort that a teacher needs to do before they teach the class. We looked at one of the states. This is before the structured pedagogy program was adopted. The teacher had to stitch together 9 different resources to teach one lesson. So the learning outcomes were available in a PDF format. They were in a website. You have to extract the learning outcomes from there. You have to then match those learning outcomes to the textbook. There was sort of some kind of activities given in another place, but those activities were not enough to cover the entire period of the classroom. Worksheets were there, but they were not really connected. So the teacher had to stitch all of these things. So one of the things that structured pedagogy tools and resources are able to do is to cut down on that planning time. And the question that needs to be asked is that when teachers are really overburdened and overworked, is their effort best utilized in creating new resources or utilizing those resources better in the classroom?
Oh,
That's, I think, the
yeah, wonderful point of
question.
view. Yeah,
The second is in looking at the work of teaching, where does the autonomy and creativity matter most? And where does it not make that much of a difference? And in some cases, may not actually be the right thing to do. So, for example, if I have access to a scientifically proven technique of teaching, let's say, a certain mathematical technique or a way to teach literacy, and that helps children to learn better, more effectively, and faster, I think it is in my best interest as a teacher to use that technique.
right.
Because eventually, a lot of teachers' motivation eventually comes from whether my children are learning or not. If more children are learning, then I feel happy as a teacher. So I think it's very important to see whether we get teachers to use the right techniques in the first place. Where teachers need more autonomy is actually in addressing the needs of individual children, because every child will have some different learning need. But if I am a teacher, I'm constantly thinking about what to teach and how to teach, and thinking about all the steps in the lesson, which questions to ask, how to structure the activities, which worksheet to give, which assessment to give. If my mind is preoccupied with that, then I will not be able to provide individual attention to the child. So I think a lot of teachers' autonomy and creativity and sensitivity as a teacher has to be preserved for their interactions with individual children.
Right.
And that is where autonomy and creativity make a huge difference. However, I would be more concerned when, in the name of creativity or autonomy, we are providing teachers with ineffective ways to teach children. So, for example, one of the ineffective ways to teach children, which seems effective, is using lots of activities, right? If you go to many schools, you will see children are engaged, they're playing games and they're, moving around. There may be some peer work going on and a lot of that. But when you actually look at whether the children have learned or not, you're not that sure, right? So therefore, we need to analyze very critically whether creativity, autonomy should be preserved on how I engage children, and a more, I would say, evidence informed approach. That doesn't necessarily mean that you stick with one approach. There could be multiple approaches which are, let's say, equally effective, but you choose approaches which are reasonably more effective than others. And the way
Right.
to ask that question is, if I go to a doctor with my child to get treated, do I want the doctor to be creative or do I want the doctor to be effective in treating my
Yeah.
child? And I think we should ask the same question about schools and learning and teaching.
Right. Wonderful points there. And I think the last point should silence all the critics that yes, we want effective teachers, and having the right techniques and tools are definitely going to empower each and every teacher. So, help us understand that if I am a teacher and I have approached CSF for help and guidance, so what sort of a toolkit I would be getting for my foundational literacy and numeracy classes?
And in fact, you don't need to approach CSF to do that. If you are a teacher in any of the states which is working with CSF, suppose you are a teacher in Uttar Pradesh or Madhya Pradesh or Haryana or Odisha or Telangana, which have adopted foundational literacy or numeracy missions, you're likely to get access to a foundational learning toolkit. And in our view, it has 4 or 5 critical components. The first component of that toolkit is a clear set of learning outcomes,
Okay.
where you have a chart or a poster or something which shows you exactly at the end of grade 1, grade 2, grade 3, and also within that grade, what is the progression of competencies that children will be able to master. That
Mhm.
gives me as a teacher very clear direction of what my children will learn at the end. Once the direction is clear, the objective is clear, I'm more likely to take my children there, right?
Right. Right.
So, for example, if children are in grade 2, should they learn about place value, and should they be able to decode paragraphs, should they be able to answer simple questions based on a story. What exactly are those learning outcomes? So I think that's the first step. The second step is having well designed, easy to use lesson plans, and that's very important. Every one of these states and also CSF and our partners have created these teacher guides. These teacher guides contain daily lesson plans. Those daily lesson plans have step by step instructions. If you're interested, I can take you through one of them in a minute. But they have clearly broken out sections where the teacher knows what kind of activities I would do with children. Typically, they follow what is called gradual release of responsibilities. So, which means that the first stage of the lesson plan is typically something that the teacher does with themselves, where presenting a concept or introducing a new idea, which is called I do. And then there is a we do phase where the teacher and the children do something together. And there's a third step is you do, where children do things on their own, of course, supervised by the teacher. So they get more independent practice. And this third step you do is very, very important, because when children get independent practice, whether they're doing math or they're doing independent reading, that's when they develop their skills, and they also need to get feedback from the teacher. That's where other teaching learning resources like children's workbooks, children's resources, print-rich materials, storybooks, and other things for literacy and for math manipulatives. And because I spoke a little bit about this whole concrete pictorial abstract approach, so math requires children also to deal with these, for lack of a better word, math toys and math objects which they can manipulate on their own. And finally, the teachers get tools to assess children. And that's very, very critical, that there are formative assessments which the teachers can do on their own. There are short, quick assessments which give them a sense of how much children have learned. And if they haven't learned, can they provide some kind of revision and remediation to the children? So, in short, the teacher's toolkit has learning outcomes, lesson plans, workbooks and textbooks, teaching learning materials, and formative assessment. And all of them talk to each other. That's very important. You can have all these resources, but if I am finding all of them difficult to stitch it all together, and then it'll be very difficult for me to implement in the classroom. So the states which are doing well, you can see that the teachers are able to stitch those materials together. CSF has developed many of these resources which are on our website. They're all open source. Anybody can access them, modify them, and we believe that all of these approach can be democratized and everybody can use them and everybody should use them.
Right. And the way I see it is that by having everything at one place, the entire ambiguity has been removed from the planning stage, the execution stage, or even the assessment of learning. Teachers don't have to really go out and search for resources themselves. Everything is available in one bundle for them to be used. And I am guessing here that all the lesson learned from the implementations are also built into these toolkits. So for example, if you have a learning from one state, then that goes back into the toolkit is revised and then made available. The revised one is made available, so it is not just based on the learnings of the CSF team, but actual from the ground also information is coming and the toolkit is being updated, right?
Yes, and that's a very important point.
Yeah,
None of whatever I have said implies that this is kind of this box product which is just forced onto teachers. It's
yeah,
a living process.
yeah.
So when we designed these resources in the beginning, some of them were very complex because we were also ambitious. We
Mm,
thought, let's pack all of these resources with all
yes,
the knowledge that we have.
right.
And when we took it to the teachers, many of them said, these are all nice, but I find them too complex to read. The second thing a lot of teachers tell us is make them more visual. Can
Mm,
I see what I'm going to do in the classroom, where I'm not only reading the steps, but I can actually visualize what want to see in the classroom. So now a lot of these resources are like comic books. books, right? They're highly pictorial, not just for the child, but also for the teacher. Similarly, teachers told us that there were specific areas where students were facing more difficulty. So, for example, a lot of teachers told us, even assessment showed that students face a lot of difficulty in something like doing addition with carryover. It might come somewhat naturally to an adult or somebody who's doing well, but a lot of children in these early years make mistakes. So we had to provide additional support in these hard spots.
Hmm.
So we constantly making mistakes and learning from them, and we're also taking feedback. And each of the states program has evolved as a result. It can never get perfect, and we can only make it better every year.
Yes, and that's even better because we are not targeting perfection. It's a living document, like you said. And tomorrow, if there is a teacher somewhere in a remote place also who has a unique point of view, and that can be added into the document, and that may benefit others also in a similar situation. So that is also empowering them to bring in their own creativity. It is not a one-way track that CSF is guiding, but the teachers are also putting their experience, their creativity back into this repository. Is there any situation or a case where CSF is still struggling with this foundational literacy or numeracy?
Lots of places, the struggles are every day, and I can go on and on and on about many of the problems we are facing. But the struggles have taught us a lot, and I can
Hmm.
quote a few examples. Personal experience, mostly as a part of this team, and also leading some of these projects. We were working on a project in one of the states, in a district, and for the first year, everything seemed to be going right. We had lots of good training programs, lives very good attendance and feedback about the training programs. The materials reached on time. The mentors were making visits, and that's when we thought that things are going really well. We probably should get very good outcomes. And just before the midline assessments, we started doing our own assessments, and we found that children were really far behind. And
Hmm.
it really shocked us. I remember doing these assessments and found that only 2-3% of children were proficient in numeracy, maybe a little bit better in literacy. And that got us really thinking hard about what we were not doing right. And as the person responsible for the program, I had a lot of reflection myself. So, one of the things we learned was that while process inputs are important, it's always important to link it to the outcomes,
Hmm.
because eventually you can put in a lot of effort and activities, and the system is very good at also conducting a lot of activities. But how do you move from activities to outputs and outcomes? And
Right.
that's when we took a hard step back. We talked to our partners, then we also talked to the district administration, and then we started working with the district administration to create more sharper goals and objectives for the program. Then the district magistrate herself started going into the classrooms, and, in fact, conducted some reading sessions with the kids and assessments to convey that how serious they were about children's educational improvement.
Right.
We identified schools which were struggling. We provided them extra trainings through the diets. And one of the interesting initiatives that our partner Room to Read took up was to introduce a 10-minute practice time, just 10 minutes for
Mm-hmm.
literacy and numeracy, because we found out through our classroom observations that you do step I was talking about, where children should do independent work, was
Mm-hmm.
not happening. Of course, the teachers were teaching the lesson plans, they were conducting the activities, but children were not getting enough
Right.
practice times.
Right. Right.
So they were not reading enough texts independently, they were not solving enough math sums independently, and not getting quick feedback. And when we instituted that, we saw that 2% score I was telling you moved to almost 60% proficiency in 4 to 5 months. And, in fact, when the third party results came out,
Hmm.
these students had achieved almost 2 years worth of learning in math.
Oh, wonderful.
And there are many such examples where we've sort of figured out what is not working. I think at least one culture we have is to keep looking at reality, checking ourselves against it, and we're constantly improving, and we're never happy with ourselves.
Yeah. And that's a way to learn. And I think all the educational leaders and the teachers would really benefit from all the lessons learned and the creativity, the hard work of the CSF team, which has gone into creating this repository. And I would urge all our listeners, all the teachers, and all the educational leaders to definitely, check out. And with you, I would like to ask you that if I'm an educational leader of a school, what should be my starting point in starting this journey with CSF?
I think if you're an education leader, I think I would recommend three things. One is to get an understanding of what are the kinds of skills and competencies children should possess at the end of grade 1, grade 2, grade 3, potentially 4 and 5, but at least these three grades, and have very clear markers for that. If
Mm-hmm.
I understand that at a leader and I can instill that orientation towards that process, that would be really good.
Right.
The second, I recommend that you spend time in classrooms. For the last decade, I have visited a lot of schools, and the schools that are doing well are the ones where the leader is spending time in the classrooms.
Right.
And the third is if you are a leader and you are working with your teachers to improve their skills, giving them coaching, giving them feedback, understanding and solving their challenges. There are many other things that school leaders do, which is all administrative duties, and they will may be important. But how much time do you spend working with your teachers can have a huge impact on your school.
Right. That is a key message for all the educational leaders. Thank you for sharing. Now, moving on to parents, I understand this structured approach is specifically designed for schools, but are there some elements that parents can also pick up for their kids? Because learning is continued at home, especially for very young kids. A lot of learning happen in the environments of home. So, what can the parents pick up from this repository, from this approach, and how can they start? Where should they start?
I think it's a great question. It's a very difficult question. The reason it's very difficult is that we as a sector, I think, have done a lot of work with teachers, with schools, what we call the supply side of education.
Right.
But as a sector, and even if I were to self critique ourselves, we need to do a lot more work with parents and what can children do at home. Also, especially with parents whose own means are limited, who are really busy and who may not have a very high degree of orientation in these practices.
Right.
How can we make things better for parents like that? So I would start off with a few simple things that we need to get parents to understand, especially those parents whose children go to government schools or low income private schools. The first is the importance of foundational learning. If parents realize that the first 3, 4 years are very important in school, they're willing to invest more of their energy, get children to school. You'll be surprised to know that attendance is very poor in many schools. The children aren't
Yeah.
coming to school.
Yeah.
There may be other structural reasons, many have family challenges, but in spite of those family challenges, if we could encourage parents to get children to school, that would be a really good first step. Our attendance in many states sometimes hovers around 50, 60%, and teachers tell us that in spite of using many of these structured techniques and resources, they often aren't able to support children to catch up if they are not attending school.
Yeah.
That is one. The second piece is schools engaging parents as a partner in the learning journey. Oftentimes, for one reason or the other, parents drop their child at the gate of the school, and that's where the school's relationship with the parents end. One of the things we are trying in some of the districts and states we're working at is to actually do parent teacher meetings in government schools. Many of these things are very common in private schools, but unfortunately, in government schools, these practices have not been institutionalized, or if they have been, they're not very meaningful. So, we're trying to bring a lot more meaning to these interactions between the school and the parent, providing parents with a constructive report card of what their child has achieved and accomplished, and areas where the child might struggle or needs support. The third is to provide parents with some easy to use resources and activities they could do with children at home. One of the important things is having conversations with children. Children who are coming from more privileged homes have a lot of oral vocabulary. And that is true because they have lots of conversations with adults around them. They're also surrounded by materials and books, and then the vocabulary becomes more around awareness of print, so on and so forth. So, having conversations with children, doing small activities with children that can help them build something. So, for example, if you're taking a child to the market, there is a lot of things you could do around math, right?
Right, right.
And telling stories to the children and listening to the children. I think we as a society need to develop this habit of listening more to children and talking less. And I think providing. And one of the things that CSF has been piloting on the edtech side is to provide low cost educational apps to parents, which they can use on low cost mobile phones to conduct some at home learning activities. One such app is Chimple. It's a great program which has shown great results, can be installed on a low cost Android phone, can use it with small activities and games, and parents can support their engagement. So, this is a long journey. I don't have all the answers.
Right.
But I think we can start somewhere with parents, and they need to be included more in the learning process.
Yes, so quite a lot is already being done, but there is still a long way to go. So, thanks for sharing this. Now, can we have a quick rapid fire round questions? First question: rote learning or discovery learning?
Both are bad.
Both
Both are in effect.
right, are ineffective. What's more important for foundational learning, a great teacher or great materials?
A good teacher with great materials can provide
Okay, best
great
of both
teaching.
worlds. Okay, please complete the sentence for us. Every child can learn if
They had an opportunity to try on their own, make mistakes, and get some feedback and try again.
Oh, that's beautiful and empowering for each child. Complete another sentence for us. Good teaching is 20% knowledge and 80%
Understanding of children.
most underrated education reform in India.
Hard question. Getting teachers to have 5 minutes of pre class preparation time.
Right. Okay, next question. If you could change one thing about teacher training in India, what would it be?
Getting teachers to practice skills that they learned in the training program.
A teacher who changed your life.
My English teacher, Dr. Purohit, I still meet him every time I go to Odisha. He got me to love reading and love literature, and that's something I've kept through my life.
So, since you've talked about literature, any book that you would advise all teachers, parents, all of us to read? Any book in particular?
I think Old Man and the Sea. It's a novel, and it talks about the value of stoic endurance. And I think building children with the ability to be resilient is a life skill.
Yes, I think stoic virtues are very much needed in today's time. Next question. Most valuable lesson a struggling student taught you?
What comes easy to an adult is not easy for the child, and to look at the world through a child's eyes is the most difficult skill a teacher or a mentor or a parent needs to have.
Oh, beautiful. Next question, and this is slightly tricky. Private schools or government schools?
Both. We have 40% children in private, 60% in government. All children need to do well, all schools need to do well.
Right. Next is also a choice: CBSE, IB, IGSE, or all the other boards going forward. What should a parent do?
It really doesn't matter in the early years. It's really up to the school to deliver a high quality instructional program.
Right. Then one message to every parent in India right now.
Spend time listening to your children.
And one message to every teacher listening to us right now.
Develop a reading habit.
And last question that, it's year 2028, 3 years from now. What is one indicator according to you which would tell us that we have done right, we have made significant progress in foundational literacy and literacy?
The day grade 4 and 5 teachers come to us and say, there is some magic happening in grade 1 to 3 and I want to go and teach in the early grades.
Yeah, that would be so wonderful. So thanks a lot for all the work that CSF is doing.
And thank you for having me and understanding our work and giving us a chance to share our journey. And I really appreciate the efforts you are making to make educational ideas more accessible to everyone.
Yes, and it has been an absolute pleasure. For our audience, we will share some of the content that Anustup has talked about. Thank you, everyone.